This episode is brought to you by The Skeptical Buddha, The Tao of Science, my book, which is a thoughtful discourse on Eastern philosophy and how it helped birth ideas required for science and skepticism and the way it fell behind in the face of new evidence. This book discusses the long history of both philosophies as well as the tenets and variations within the varying sects, along with psychology and our own natural biases. It discusses how to counter our natural biases using science and the underlying concepts of meditation and mindfulness, a more complex understanding of how science operates than most of the public understands, and why it is the best tool we have to discover truth and reality, as well as philosophical ideas we might embrace as technology progresses. The material is packaged in a way that the average person can understand, with rich illustrations to draw the reader in and feel at peace. The term Karen is used to define an often middle-aged woman, mostly white, middle class and race segregated, and very entitled. This is a common stereotype and subsection of a demographic we've all encountered, though it sucks for women actually named Karen, as the majority don't fit the stereotype. I began analyzing the traits of Karens and realized they matched so many people in how they view politics. You may hate the system, you may want to topple the state, and you may want to topple capitalism, but until you have built something to replace it, or have a massive civil war or revolutionary war that will kill tons of people, especially disabled folks, and completely kill the planet in terms of climate change, this is the system we have for now, like it or not. Just as you have to engage in capitalism at this point if you want the benefits from it in spite of the drawbacks, you have to engage in electoral politics if you want any of the benefits in spite of the drawbacks, which you can do at the same time as working on creating dual power to replace the old without having a fascistic government take over and utterly crush any chance you have of transitioning ever. Here are 10 ways to tell if you're a political Karen and feel entitled to things in electoral politics, but often don't participate at all, ensuring you get nothing. Number 10, assume you're the only one who deserves to be heard. Just like with a Karen at a store, you act like and assume that you or your group's point of view is the only one that should be heard and matters. Your point of view may be the best, but this is a nation of people with diametrically opposed ideas, ideals, and points of view that somehow have to live together. The way you spread your ideas is to never act entitled, never attack, and always be ready to listen to the other side with humility and curiosity, at least for a little bit until you see the telltale signs of a troll. I disagreed with a person on one thing the other day on Twitter, and immediately they exploded on me, tried to publicly shame me in the feed, and just viciously attacked my viewpoint, ensuring that even if they were 100% right, I and anyone with any manners would immediately back away from and ignore it, just like anyone dealing with a Karen. Number 9, assume that if reality is working against you, then it's an employee problem or you're personally being slighted. All Karens mercilessly attack people with little power in their jobs and treat anything that doesn't go their way as a personal slight. The founding idea of this nation is that you vote for a large body of people with weakened power to ensure no one can be a tyrant, and all sides have a voice. This is in theory, of course, with two parties only, gerrymandering the electoral college, and extreme imbalance of the populations by states. Your vote is sadly much more watered down than it should be, but you still have something of a voice if you choose to use it. Politicians who are supposed to represent you and be public servants are often treated as our rulers, which might be true, but they're also ruled by election results, an internal party pressure to ensure they can keep getting elected. So just like having a manager, while technically having political power, they are bound by rules and pressures that ensures they can only act and do certain things. Changing these rules and pressures is possible, but very hard, and require a company with a large enough group of people to boycott before they decide to change. Number 8, never take into account that there is a larger customer base who wants the exact opposite of what you want. A company often tries to cater to as many demographics as possible. This often ends up with something that's never tailor-made for one person, but something okay enough that anyone can find something they like. However, Karen will never take that into consideration and get mad that a company is trying to please as many people as possible who may want the opposite of her, isn't personally catering to her and her desires. It's why the term happy holidays is used. It wasn't a slight against Christians, but a way to appeal to everyone. It's why everyone says, there is no politician that represents me. No, a good politician will only ever represent the most average wishes of their constituents, or they can't get elected, or if enough people don't vote because they don't feel represented, an extreme base will monopolize the vote, ensuring that an entire side that didn't vote is completely marginalized. If they vote as a reaction and then get their candidates, and that person tries to represent the average of all voters or do with a slight leaning toward their side, the person doesn't cater directly 100% to you, so you give up and don't bother voting again because it doesn't change anything. If that candidate did cater only to you, it means there is a large chunk of voters that also feel marginalized, where the candidate would lose because not enough voters want what you want. What you have to do is change the minds of your fellow voters, and the politicians will change their positions based on what their people want to get them elected. Even better is if we could change the two-party system to a ranked choice voting system, but even then, that would only kill the chances of voter bases getting a monopoly and would instead pick the candidates closest to the center of the political gradient of the population, but with way more choices in these political gradients than we have now, which might still make people believe that no one represents them, because there are a ton of polar opposite voters, so the politician either has to cater to a marginalizing base or cater to the middle of the population. Number 7, don't realize that if you or your demographic aren't customers, your opinion really doesn't matter that much to them. Brand loyalty is very powerful. If you never bought from a place or only a handful of people are engaged, a boycott won't do a damn thing. If you were never their customer and you boycott, they don't care. Also, if they have enough other people buying and there isn't a good alternative, they can wait it out until their boycott ends. Small businesses still can make a profit even with a small demographic pool. Kentucky had the smallest voter turnout in U.S. history at 14% in 2015, and a Democratic governor who gave them the best Obamacare website in the nation and had a 60% approval rating lost miserably just due to voter apathy, which made the state so much worse. The boycott didn't change anything except having the government cater to the people who actually voted. Not voting, even with a 14% voter turnout, doesn't make an election any less legitimate in the US. Not voting in this social contract is de facto agreement to whatever. Number 6, never question if your position is the minority view. One of the biggest shocks and wake-up calls to many Bernie supporters was the fact that he lost both times. Because of the echo chambers online, and they only ever talked to people around them who were for him, so they believed they were a much bigger voting bloc than they actually were. Yeah, he won quite a few states, but the primary was not determined by those states, mostly red states that had a low demographic turnout, but not the majority blue states that swarmed for Hillary, Biden, or a candidate that gave them their delegates, as have been the rules forever. 8 to 15% of Americans consider themselves leftists, the highest in U.S. history since the 1940s. This is the same percentage of the nation that believes the moon landing was faked. However, 52% of Americans have extreme left phobia and hate and are scared of anything that even breathes the word socialism. Each political party roughly represents 1/3 of the population, with non-voters and independents representing the extra third. Bernie ended up getting 1/3 of a third of the vote, which is exactly what one would expect with a demographic that size. Some may have liked Bernie, but especially older voters knew how much voters feared socialism, making him in their mind a non-viable candidate for now. Some on the right may have also liked Bernie, but liked Trump even more, so they voted in the Republican primary instead of the Democratic primary. Trumpers had the exact same shock when Trump lost, because everyone they talked to, everyone they interacted with in their lives, media and social media bubbles, were pro-Trump, and Trump had so many large crowd rallies and Biden had none. It was completely impossible that Trump could have lost, so it must be rigged, completely ignoring that the majority of Americans absolutely loathed Trump. They just never met those people, so they couldn't possibly exist in their mind. It's because of this phenomena that so many accused the Democratic Party of cheating Bernie, even though they followed the rules to the letter to get the candidate they wanted. No cheating needed. The establishment Democrats were really just old Democratic voters with enough left phobia or awareness of left phobia to still not want Bernie. Number 5, demand the rules that they have changed to specially fit you. Karens have plagued the mask mandate rules that stores had that were meant to protect everyone and demand that they get the rules changed or lifted just for them. This ties back into the last point, that so many Bernie supporters believe the Democratic Party cheated him, even though they followed rules many Berners never knew existed, many rules which had been around since the 1970s that they never bothered to learn, then were shocked when they were used. It's like when you play a game everyone has agreed to the rules on, and suddenly a new player comes in and doesn't realize a rule is in the game, and gets angry though that rule has always been there. It isn't cheating. By entering a store, you are consenting to the rules of the store. By voting in a primary, you are consenting to the rules of the primary. By voting in the general, you are consenting, even if you feel under coercion, to the rules of the state. If you don't vote, you are consenting, even if you feel under coercion, to the votes of the voters. You have 4 choices. Give up and take it, get involved, get out of the nation, resort to or become a victim of violence because you no longer have the collective to protect you anymore, and are, by all accounts in old British legal terms, an outlaw, where you are no longer bound by the rules of the law, but you also no longer get the protections of the law either. Each time Bernie won as many votes as he did, he was able to influence and change the party rules. Your vote wasn't in vain, and he may not have won, but you still had an impact on how the next election goes. It just may take quite a few election cycles and enough time to spread your ideas and change minds. It's called patience, and while yes, injustice is horrible, if you have the political attention span of a goldfish and don't stick to it long term, nothing will ever change. Number 5, always assume you're right. Never, ever, ever look at someone else's ideas with humility, compassion, or curiosity. That is the hallmark trait of the true Karen. Your way is truly the only way, and if someone doesn't agree with you, you will shame them, berate them, and demand to speak to someone's intellectual manager. In the online marketplace of ideas, it's possible you are dealing with a fake company and fake store with fake employees selling your toxic products for fun or profit called trolls. But give everyone a chance if you can first before attacking them, ask questions, use the Socratic method, and the principle of charity. Mind you, roughly 40% of the internet traffic is now just bots, so if you get angry and riled up and demand to speak to their manager, you're going to be more hair-trigger with the next real person who may use the same language. That is exactly what the troll bots were designed to do, and their creator wins. If you don't genuinely understand the other side's point of view and why the believers believe it, other than they're all evil, you're just as bad and toxic as them, and a political Karen. My mother and I stand diametrically opposed on things. If I was a political Karen, I would shame her and treat her as utter racist scum. Instead, I fully understand what her thinking is and what her point of view is, as well as what I think she's missing from her calculations and experiences. Her points of view come from the best intentions, though with, in my view, an over-limited scope of reality taken into account. That's how a con man or an illusionist sells things, by closing all other points of view until theirs is the only possible answer. If her point of view is correct, then yes, my point of view would be utterly evil. But even if she doesn't understand my position or want to put in the effort to understand my position, she at least knows I also came to my position with the best of intentions, so she tries to meet me halfway where we do agree. For much of her life, she was a political Karen by this definition, but once her kids grew up and began adopting extreme points of view different from hers, she had to either treat them as evil or realize that we mean well, we just decided that our way of meaning well differs from hers. Hopefully, with many internet leftists, once they grow out of their new angry phase, they will be able to understand and interact with their opponents also, and see that at least their opponents mean well, while spotting the ones that don't, which is why I try to shun anything that creates an internet bubble, and use alternatives to social media in the Fediverse, which allows me to be much more calm. More of that on my channel if you want to know more. Number 4, don't realize that a thing you hate is based on market trends of past customers, and only by buying from them will you be able to change things. I have a video called What is Political Will? In it, I describe political will as the polling data of the voting base. They have the data on who votes because voter rolls and locations are public for all to see. Using stats and polling, they can see what areas had the most voter turnout and then take polls of these areas to discover positions from the voters and try to craft their election platform around that. Statistically, it is easier to get a voter to switch parties than to get a non-voter to become a voter. This is fairly well-known data in political circles, which is why many don't bother to try and convince non-voters to vote. They have limited resources, so they have to aim at the most likely results, so they essentially ignore the wishes of the non-voters. Bernie said he was going to overturn this, and I really hoped he would, but he just proved the rule and didn't bring in many more new voters than average. Add to this that young people vote at a fraction of the rate of old people, so American politics is always 10 years behind what the average American actually wants. It's why only now you see the Biden administration line up with the ideals of the Occupy movement of vague demands and not the clear-cut examples we all want now. Add to all of this that thanks to the Paperwork Reduction Act of the Carter years, meant to save the taxpayers' money, it actually ended up with serious side effects as it made it pretty much impossible for elected officials to directly ask and survey their constituents, so they can't tell what their people want at any one time, except for people who call them, ensuring we have the nation with the population that feels least represented, because the politician is most likely to be swayed by constituent phone calls and sometimes emails, as that is the closest up-to-the-minute voter opinion they can get. This allows a group of people like the NRA who can pull AstroTurf influence to make the 10% opinion seem like the majority opinion, because those are the only people who care enough or informed enough on specific votes to care, so a politician thinks the issue is way more important one way than it actually is. Often it's not bribery, it's just these kinds of AstroTurf campaigns that make well-meaning representatives try and accurately represent their constituents often end up with really badly skewed sample sizes. Number 3, expect immediate results. I hear so many online claiming they aren't going to bother voting again because Biden isn't doing what they wanted. Once again, this is a political Karen move. Remember, in a two-party system, other than during the primary, you aren't voting for anyone. You're voting against the worst. Prior to Trump, we had a well-balanced Supreme Court and lower courts. After Trump, we have a 6-3 Supreme Court with radical right-wing activist judges, so unless Manchin and Sinema allow him to expand the court size, which they won't, we are very much stuck with a Supreme Court that will shoot down any progressive legislation and continue to cripple voting rights, free exercise and speech rights, workers' rights, and reproductive rights just because one measly election at the worst political crossroads at the worst time. This could halt progress for decades, as unless Biden wins a second term with a majority in the Senate, it's quite probable that Thomas and Alito will step down for the next president, as they are in their 70s and conservative, but if Biden wins one more, they may have to retire for health reasons or die in office, which would give the next president the chance to either flip the seat or shore it up even further, with a much younger conservative, and the rest are purposely super young in their 50s to early 60s, with only Roberts and Sotomayor at 67. Thankfully, this election was a general election during the redistricting election. Gerrymandering is a huge issue, and last time, thanks to the AstroTurf Tea Party movement, Republicans were able to unfairly get 27 more House seats than they should have ever had available. Thankfully, thanks to the mix of anti-gerrymandering laws and having been a general election with higher turnout, the best they will get is 5 to 10 more seats in the House than they should have. Still completely unfair and unrepresentative, but still better than nothing. If you vote at no other time, vote in the redistricting year election every 10 years. Sadly, of course, Trump did everything he could to screw over minorities in the census, so even though Biden was able to step in and take over most of it, since Trump bungled it that badly, it was still too late to ensure minorities were counted at nearly the level they should have been, giving them even less political power. All elections have consequences that last decades, and you have to build the foundation of change, often slowly, to get a huge change further down the road. Skip an election out by throwing a fit because you can't see beyond this next 2 to 4 years, and it will make any change impossible ever. Number 2, treat any good thing they roll out as pandering. They're just trying to provide a service you will buy. If the store doesn't have exactly what you want and they offer an alternative, a true Karen will act as if they're just trying to make a measly way to placate them, and a replacement is not acceptable. The same is true with the political Karen. If someone gets rolled out but not far enough as they would like, that is just virtue signaling and pandering, even though the average of the voters only want that, as the population is made up of people who want polar opposites. Your elected leader does not represent you. They represent all of their constituents. And number 1, remember to be obnoxious as possible, but don't actually do anything that might change anything. Throw a fit, get angry, be as nasty as possible, and do everything you can to make yourself annoying and not do anything to actually create change, ensuring everyone other than repeating bots and other Karens want to stay away from you, creating a bubble around you, making you even more isolated and more of a Karen. This will damage your ability to communicate in any other way than as a nasty, angry person, which will make anyone who encounters you miserable and have a bad opinion of anyone who holds your opinion, if they aren't lucky enough to encounter enough non-Karens with your point of view. Hi everyone. As you've noticed if you're watching this, I recently paid for a month's subscription to Storyblocks for $65 a month. I've been told my message is great, but my production quality is subpar, so I'm seeing if this helps. I don't know how well this will go, but it's not money I really have long term, and the videos take 5 times as long to make, especially with my dinosaur slow computer. So if you like this format better, go to Patreon and encourage me to do more by becoming a patron. If it seems to be something people like, I'll buy a years-long subscription, which costs about half as much per month. I'll also be playing around and seeing what the best format is, perhaps doing a still image for every 3 to 4 video clips. I'll figure it out. Vote with pledges if you like this format. Thanks. And if you would like to see one of my videos from the past reworked in this format, let me know when you donate. Also, by making it to the end of this video, please write the word Karen in the comments section to help let the algorithm know how much you like this video. So as always, thank you all for watching this as a video or listening to this as a podcast, which I'm sure was completely uncontroversial to anyone, especially to the YouTube monetization team. So if you found this useful, please donate to my Patreon. Just a reminder that I'm Anubis2814 on YouTube, and I have almost 700 videos on my channel that I've made over the past 11 years on religion, science, psychology, and politics. Please go check them out, and if your site has the option, like, rate, review, and comment. A special thanks goes out to Kendall Copperberg, Mylon Mia, Ogrel, Elias Garcia Guevara, and Joe Taylor for their $10 or more Wapawet level donations. I'm always humbled by the fact that they find my work worth funding and worth driving me forward. Thank you all. Please consider donating to my work if you can, and thank you all for listening.